The acculturation gap. The acculturation gap between Mexican American parents and kids. In order to help others grasp the concept of the acculturation gap, I'll be providing an example from the book, The Namesake. This story follows an immigrant's family's journey to America, and it talks about the pain of losing a loved ones and the struggles and hardships that go with having a relationship. It also provides a perfect example of the acculturation gap. Gogol Ganguly is the main character of the book, and in the section of the book I'm talking about, he is around 18 years old. He is named after his father's favorite author, Nikolai Gogol, who happens to be Russian, whereas Gogol and his family are all Bengali. He is ashamed of his name and culture, so when he goes to school as a young boy, he slowly defies his parents and his Bengali culture in an attempt to fit in. Gogol develops a different culture from his parents, traditional Bengali culture, which causes conflict in the home. This is what happens due to the acculturation gap. But what is the acculturation gap? In order to explain the acculturation gap, I must first explain what acculturation is. I will use Berry's acculturation model in order to explain. The first step to acculturation is assimilation. That's when a person takes different ideas of the new culture they're going into and different parts of their culture in order to fit in. The second part is integration, when they actually apply these new ideas and cultural ideas that they get. This creates an own individualized culture for that person. Eva Telzer, an assistant professor in developmental psychology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, using the acculturation gap distress model, agrees that immigrant children indeed acculturate at a different rate than their parents, which causes conflict in the home. But this begs the question, do the different rates of cultural integration between parents and kids truly affect the way Mexican American kids think and behave? Now, before I answer this question, I must ask, why did I choose Mexican Americans? All immigrant groups experience the negative effects of different rates of acculturation between parents and kids. But in order to learn more about the complexities when it comes to different rates of culture integration, I had to specifically focus on one group. I chose Mexican American groups because currently in the US, there is a lot of prejudice against Mexican American groups and Mexican immigrants. My wish is for people to understand just a fraction of what these people have to go through when they integrate into a new culture. The different rates of acculturation affect someone's cultural identity, family relations, academic performance, and mental health. First, I will be discussing the topic of cultural identity. What is cultural identity? Cultural identity is how one views themselves and their culture. When integrating into a new place, a kid starts often with the culture of their parents, because that's what they grew up learning. But as they get into this new place, they pick up different people's culture and eventually create their own cultural identities. And although kids are discovering themselves, parents are sometimes against this, which is when it causes problems with family relations. Laura A. Pash, a professor of psychiatry at UCSF Well Institute for Neuroscience, did research on parent-adolescent conflict and adolescent adjustment in Mexican American families. Through her extensive research, she uncovered that because of the differences due to acculturation, many parents try to manage these differences. This causes conflicts in the home because families are trying to restrict the acculturation process of their kids. This ultimately causes conflict and has negative effects on the children. Children then start to stray away from their parents because of this constant conflict, which creates a barrier between parents and kid. Another negative effect is academic performance. Dr. Larry Dimka, a marriage and family therapist, said that Mexican American students are 2 to 4 times more likely to drop out of school than other minorities. This information was gathered after controlling factors such as socioeconomic statuses. Dr. Larry Dimka also found out that Mexican American kids statistically have lower grades, tests, and standardized test scores. The last topic I will discuss is how acculturation negatively affects mental health. Dr. Dimka also wrote that Mexican American youth, acculturation has been tied to depressive thoughts and behaviors, suicidal ideation, substance use and substance abuse, and delinquent behavior. This delinquent behavior also causes more turmoil in the home because no parent wants their kid to go out and do something criminal. Now, all of these eventually widen the gap until the relationship between family and kids becomes irreparable. And this is the full circle. It starts because the kids act out because of the conflicts caused by acculturation, which leads to more fights, which makes the gap wider and wider. And as for the mental health aspect, this could lead to kids having long-term addiction problems and long-term mental health problems, because that is how they cope with the conflicts with their parents. All of the academic and mental health problems and cultural identity problems stem from poor family relations. But there is a solution to poor family relations caused by the acculturation gap. This being family therapy. Why family therapy? Well, family therapy would be gathering the whole family and sitting down and talking to a licensed therapist. Family therapy would be useful because it allows kids and parents to discuss their different ideas and problems in a safe space. But there are limitations to family therapy. One of those being affordability. Not all people can afford a therapy. It's relatively expensive. And while insurance pays for most of the therapy costs, not all families can afford insurance. They can also not afford to lose time. In this scenario, time also is money. Some families can afford to take the time off of work to go to therapy because they need to work to get that money in order to survive. There are also pros to family therapy. One of those being, it would create a safe space in the home, a safe environment for parents and kids to be able to talk about their differences. It also equips parents and kids with problem-solving skills. You don't just go into therapy and suddenly your problems are solved. Therapists are there to equip parents in skills so that when they come across problems later, they're able to solve them. But there are also cons to family therapy. One of those being, you cannot force someone to do a therapy session. If everyone in the family agrees to go to therapy except one person, that will only end up causing more conflict in the home instead of resolving conflict. It also increases vulnerability. Therapy makes people vulnerable. It brings out their darkest secrets and deepest emotions. And some see vulnerability as a sign of weakness, which could prevent them from attending therapy. There are also some generational problems that go back to their ancestors, and those are hard to solve, and not many people want to bring those up. In conclusion, there are negative effects to the acculturation gap. More specifically, negative effects to one's cultural identity, family relations, academic performance, and mental health. And although family therapy is a good solution, the limitations keep it from being available to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, Abigail, how did some preliminary information you gathered inform your research?
When I first started my research, I came across an article by Dr. Larry Dumka, who talked about how there are many negative effects to the acculturation gap, specifically in Mexican American families. And that was the first time I'd seen an article about Mexican American families. So this preliminary find really allowed me to expand my research and dive deeper into the problems with Mexican American families and acculturation.
And how did you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your research?
So, in quite a few articles, specifically Telzer, who is a psychiatrist, and as I just discussed, Dr. Larry Dumka, they all talked about the negative effects. And the negative effects were my main argument. And they concluded that these negative effects are very harmful to these kids and their family ties. So I used that conclusion and tied it into my own conclusion.
Very good. Give her a hand.